2022 is now in session. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the November 17th, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So,
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion, modifications?
I'm abstaining, I wasn't there.
Okay, you're abstaining. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. One abstention. The minutes are officially adopted. The board will now conduct the public hearings on today's agenda. The way we do it here is that first the applicant or the applicant's representative will state the reasons for the requested variance and present any material or documentation which is to be considered regarding the proposal. Next, persons wishing to speak in favor of the proposal will be given the opportunity to address the board. Then persons who wish to speak in opposition will be allowed to address the board. Finally, the applicant or a representative will be given the option to make any closing arguments or comments to the board. Following the public hearings this afternoon, the board may make a decision on each application heard. The board may also decide to hold its decision until the next public hearing. If the hearing is closed, no additional information will be allowed into the record except for information that the board may request. That information will be available for public review at the zoning office in City Hall Commons. Staff will now introduce the first application.
Yes, good afternoon. Our first hearing today is V-08-21M2. It's a use variance request to waive permitted uses at 960 Salt Springs Road. The request is to establish a children's mental health respite program with 12 beds in an existing building. The owner applicant is Elmcrest Children's Center. The zoning district is residential class A1.
Is the applicant present? Okay, who's representing you? Somebody should be making a statement.
Good afternoon. My name is Jared McCormick. I'm with Daniel Manning Architects. I'm the project architect.
Could you give an address, please?
Yes, 225 Wilkinson Street, Syracuse, New York.
And maybe raise the mic a little bit so we can hear you better. Okay, thank you.
Elmcrest is endeavoring to establish a 12-bed mental health facility in their existing family support center at 960 Salt Springs Road. The building is existing. It is currently a special use facility. We're just repurposing it into a 12-bed mental health facility for children.
So I think we gave variances in the past for what exists
Yes.
there now. What's the difference in use as a use variance? What's the difference in use between what's happening previously and what you want to happen?
The difference in use is the previous use was for 14 beds for crisis support, I believe it is, for children who needed to be removed from homes. The new use is a mental health for children, adolescents under the age of 18.
So how will that be different? How are the children's behavior different? How is that all different?
I believe that'd be
Is
better.
somebody else?
Yeah.
They're welcome to join you as long as they tell me their name and address.
I'm Patrick Casey, 960 Salt Springs Road. I oversee our programming operations, and I'm sort of one of the project leads for this program. So previously, it was a contract with Onondaga County. It was for sort of a particular focus, kids being removed from their homes and sort of placed there. It was called Family Support Center. We are looking to shift. It's working now with the Office of Mental Health. So we're obtaining two licenses, one for each 6-bed program. Sort of a continuum of care in our community. This has been identified as a gap. Essentially, we're looking to reduce the cycle of kids who are going to the ER, going to the hospital. We were actually approached initially by SUNY Upstate about can you guys look at developing something that would meet this sort of this gap in our local continuum of care. So that's sort of what has sort of driven us looking at establishing this.
So these are young children, let's call them, with mental health issues. And when I read it, they will continue their regular lives. In other words, they'll go to school or their after school job and then come back and live.
Correct, and it's under OMH regulations 589, and sort of the idea is to provide this intervention that supports the crisis and stabilization, but also does not disrupt to the degree that inpatient or getting stuck at the hospital might. I think realistically, the child has to be sort of offline for a day or two. You're sort of looking to stabilize, but then sort of maintain an integration. And really, the OMH license only speaks to the child being in the program. It's up to 21 days, but there's an aftercare portion that we would be providing that's pretty significant to it being an effective program.
There's very strict guidelines as to if they're leaving, they have to be back by a certain time, and
Yeah, I mean, there's some leeway in terms of what that looks like in terms of the management. It's a voluntary program, so the child is there because the parent or the guardian and child have said, we want this. You're working directly with the family to sort of support
so
that
they're
placement.
helping out to make sure
Yeah.
things are.
I think a cool feature of crisis respite, if it's done well, is it's a home-like environment. It's not intended to feel and look like an institution. It should be welcoming. It should really have that sense of this is a place that I feel comfortable, I'll be supported. Really, a lot of the renovations have been with that in mind. There's primarily static. There's a couple other things that are more structural, but that's really the idea. This should feel like a place that you would want to bring your child. You would feel comfortable and sort of bringing your child and leaving your child there.
Other questions from the board?
Yeah, this is right on the Elmcrest campus, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And you're just really changing the focus of service, correct?
Correct. Yeah, when you drive into our campus, this building's on the left. It's a nice large building. It's relatively new.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and Elmcrest, we're sort of evolving. We used to be all in an orphanage and then residential, and really now
Right.
it's sort of more different levels of service. And
So it's
this
just
will be
sort
added
of an evolution of the service to meet the need
Correct.
that is presently facing us as a community right now.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think I read it, but I'm gonna ask staff, why do they need a use variance where it seems like it's the same thing, children are staying in
Yeah,
this?
that's my.
It is a care home, and that was what was previously approved, but there are changes now. They're changing the floor layout. There's also, I believe, going to be some changes to the site. Did you bring up your?
Yes, I have copies of that site plan.
So it's,
The use.
there's just conditions that are changing.
I'll just add, you always gotta remember that, whenever you have, especially a use variance, you wanna issue the narrowest remedy. So when that remedy changes, then it has to come back to the board. So we try to, avoid that if possible, but in this case, we saw it and we said, well, this is enough of a change that it really should go back to the board to make sure the variance is whole.
And the
Before we get to the site layout, can I just ask one question regarding the use variance test we have to go through? I assume part of the change here is funding sources have changed, so this is a new funding source, an old funding source has changed, this is continuing to support operations. We just have to figure out if there's another reasonable rate of return here. But if it's grant funding with different parameters, I think that is something we just need to put on the record to change on the financial test.
Previous program was a contract with Onondaga County. This is funded through the Office of Mental Health, so there is a shift in terms of that component.
So there's no funding for the existing use.
In the comments that mentioned some problems with ADA accessibility, did you see those? Can you respond?
Yes, we've addressed that by proposing to modify the existing network sidewalk to connect across the crosswalk.
You have a picture of that for us?
Yes, to distribute to,
Move up here.
Yeah, I'll bring these up.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember.
Chair, if we need to. Mike and I go.
Just have to- Other questions from the board? Anybody? Thank you very much. Is there anybody who would like to speak in favor of the application that's not attached to the organization? Anybody here to speak in favor? Is there anybody here to speak, you can sit down, thank you. Anybody here to speak against the application? Okay, hearing none, we will move on, close the case, move on to our next case.
Okay, our next case is V-22-22, a use variance request to waive permitted uses at 360, 360 and a half, and 362 to 366 Richmond Avenue. The request is to establish a four-family dwelling. The owner is the Greater Syracuse Property Development Corporation. The applicant is a tiny home for good. The zoning is residential Class A.
Good afternoon, I'm Terry Luckett from the Syracuse Land Bank, 431 East Fayette Street in Syracuse. 36266 Richmond Ave was built in 1920. Assessment records show that it's a 5-family building, but it's actually configured with only 4 units. The apartments are 3,300 square feet total, and there's a 218 square foot front porch. Property's been in our inventory since December of 2015, and it's been categorized as a demolition since that time, or a borderline demolition, sorry. And as of today's date, we haven't secured funding for that demolition, and nobody in those 7 years has come forward to renovate it for a use that's allowed in RA. This summer, the Land Bank received a purchase offer from a Tiny Home for Good. They're a nonprofit that provides housing to people facing homelessness. They'd like to maintain the 4-family use because it fits the needs of their clients and because it simplifies service delivery for their case management team. The building's proximity to the bus stop, to shopping, to restaurants, makes it possible to host 4 of the buyer's tenants here, most of whom don't own a vehicle. The offer from Tiny Home for Good is contingent on the Land Bank obtaining a use variance for the 4-family use. There's 3 other related applications you might know about. There's a re-subdivision to combine there's a 1-foot strip of land right next to the building, and then there's a vacant lot at 360 Richmond Ave. We're going to subdivide those. We submitted an area variance requesting a waiver of on-site parking because a Tiny Home for Goods tenants don't generally own vehicles. We submitted an encroachment application that deals with the front porch is encroaching in the public right-of-way, and then there's a side entrance and then a retaining wall that encroach. So the standards of proof. Reasonable return, we've gone through in detail in our application how the building is not suitable for conversion to any use that's permitted in the zone. So it's therefore not capable of earning a reasonable return. If demolished, the demolition costs could never be recovered through the sale of the vacant lot. Number 2, unique circumstances. The building presents unusual circumstances that differ from other properties on the street because it's 3,300 square feet. It's 41% larger than the typical 2-family. It's almost twice the size of the typical single-family on that street. If converted to a single or 2-family, it would be outsized compared to the neighboring homes. The essential character of the neighborhood, number 3, the approval of the variance as a 4-family will not change the essential character of the neighborhood. This section of Richmond Ave contains 2 other apartment buildings. Disinvestment is prevalent on this block of Richmond Ave. There's several houses are vacant, some are seizable. For tax delinquency, there's many vacant lots where demolitions have occurred. This street needs some help. Allowing the variance will improve the neighborhood by facilitating the redevelopment of this dilapidated and abandoned property. And number 4, self-created hardship. The hardship is not self-created. The property was abandoned, seized by the city of Syracuse in December 2015 for unpaid property taxes. It was conveyed to the land bank for redevelopment. The hardship presented by the building's current configuration is not the result of an action taken by either the land bank, by the city of Syracuse, or by any future purchaser. I have Andrew Lunetta here, who can answer any questions about the construction or the use. Do you have any?
Yes, what kind of shape is the building in? It's been vacant for a while?
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. My name's Andrew Lunetta. I'm the director of A Tiny Home for Good. Our offices are at 1222 South Ave. To answer your question, it's in rough shape currently. I don't remember how long it's been vacant for, but it looks as if at least 10 years. And I feel as if it is, as Terry said, a good candidate for demolition. However, a reason why we're excited about it is because it's kind of right at a really important corner that I feel that particular neighborhood needs some addressing. And as Terry said, there's a lot of other properties owned by the land bank that we're interested in as we further our mission. So I see it as a really good kind of like gateway to different houses that we're working on there. So to shortly answer your question, it's in rough shape.
So you've got a lot of work to put into it to make
Sure.
it acceptable? Mm-hmm. Do you have a budget? What do you estimate you'd have to expend?
Yeah, about $170,000.
Is this the first large project you've taken on?
We've done other rehabs before. This is the first 4-family we have done. You're right, radically different from kind of the tiny home new construction model that we've kind of been really proud of. But I mean, when I think about what we're trying to do as an organization, it's be a part of ending homelessness in Syracuse, and we're not going to do that by building just a couple tiny homes every year. So, and the other side of the spectrum would be buying, like, I don't know, like a big building and putting 50 of the tenants into that. And we have no interest in doing that for our tenants' purposes or for, frankly, the neighborhood also. So we're looking at working with the land bank to identify places that might be 4 units, 3 units, 2 units, and using that to further our mission faster.
You're re-subdividing the empty lot next door. Why not use it for parking?
Terry, you might be able to speak more to why we determined that wouldn't be a good option.
I don't know if you noticed the grading on that lot. It's, first of all, they don't need parking. Second of all, there's a slope there, and the landscape architect thought it would require a retaining wall, and that would be very expensive. And if it's not needed, we figured ask.
And there's a curb cut there now?
There is a curb cut there.
Which will be removed, yeah.
Oh, like the front porch is enclosed, are you going to open that up? Or
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
What about the strange tunnel entrances that are there?
Right, so the Wall Street entrance is an entrance into the basement, which will be going away. Further back on Wall Street, like more towards the school, is the entrance to one of the back apartments, and we have an encroachment, what is it? We have an encroachment application in to allow that to be rebuilt where it stands. But the silly tunnel right there will be going away, for sure.
In the case, I'm not sure if there's a staff question or an applicant question. The maximum allowed structural coverage is 30%, and the proposed is a minimum of 32%. Well, that's the minimum. So I was wondering if you know plus or minus, is it 40, 50, 60, 70% as far as structural coverage goes? So you have to talk to the microphone, please, if you're gonna talk.
I don't know the answer, but I suspect that with the re-subdivision, that will be well within the allowed coverage.
That's
I mean,
correct.
right now, the whole building is covering that 360-62.
So could
That-
our approval be contingent on the re-subdivision going through?
I think the re-subdivision is contingent on this going through.
I think that's a typo, the minimum of 32, I think, so I apologize for that.
It was a staff. And the other thing I saw here is that zoning planner commented that the applicant must select the final front entrance design and correct the plan. So is that something that's needed before we approve a variance?
The plans showed two options, the full porch and then a smaller porch. Have you,
Craig told you which one he wanted, right?
so it's the full porch, right?
Yeah, it's the full porch.
Okay, so we know which one that is, okay. Other questions?
Looking at the floor plans, it looked like one of the bedrooms has no windows, is that correct? Or was that just a mistake on my part?
Which,
Oh,
yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think so.
All bedrooms have to have windows. I think it's just a,
It's on page 92 of the thing.
Okay, well, if
Well, anyway,
it was absolutely a mistake, like, we would have a window if that is the case in the plans.
People like to sleep in the dark, but that's going.
No, that's
Yeah.
not good. We don't want that, yeah.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank both of you. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody here who wishes to speak against the application? Hearing none, we'll close the case and move on to our third case.
Okay, our third public hearing is V-22-19. It's an area variance request to waive the required front yard at 1001-19 and 127-29 East Genesee Street, and 313 to 323, 309, and 301 to 307 South Crouse Avenue, and 1014 through 16 East Fayette Street.
So before we start, Lisa, should we get the answer to the question I had or hear the presentation first?
Well, I was gonna finish reading through this, and then,
Oh, you didn't finish the addresses?
No,
Oh,
no.
I'm sorry.
It's a long one,
I
yeah.
wasn't following along. Yeah, no, I know it is. Go ahead, put it in the record.
alrighty. It's a building rehabilitation and demolition to facilitate new construction to establish a 6-story mixed-use apartment building with retail space, 282 dwelling units and amenity space, a parking garage with 146 spaces, and an additional off-site parking spaces. The owners are Bucky Enterprises LLC, 1027 East Genesee Street LLC, South Crouse Commons, Charleston Lamont Collins, Eric Yvette Collins, and 1014 to 1016 Fayette Street Parking LLC. The applicant is Timberwolf Capital Properties LLC. The zoning is local business class A.
Well, I had a question which is important as far as it applies to what we are deliberating on this, because it says waivers of required front yard for us. Is that all we're deliberating on? Are we considering parking as well? Or it says here that's for the planning commission. I just want to make sure we knew.
Right, so, area considerations, and Lisa, correct me if I get this wrong, are the purview of the BZA. Because this is under project site review, the parking can be waived by the planning commission. And we are working through some parking, alternatives right now, but that, they shouldn't affect this area variance that's before you today.
Okay, so
And the way that the way that progression has gone with the, accessory parking, we don't really foresee any area variances there.
So required front yard is all, okay, but it'd be good to get a.
But we wanted you to know the scope of the whole project.
Yes, thank you, yes. Sir.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Brian Bouchard with CHA Consulting. We're the project engineer working on behalf of the applicant and developer for this project.
An address for you, please.
We are at 300 South State Street, Suite 600, Syracuse. As mentioned by staff, we're here specifically for a encroachment into the front yard for a very small portion of the building that I'll describe specifically to you. But what I'd like to do is take a step back, as indicated by staff, and just give you a general overview of what the totality of the project is. I've also given you a handout, which is some very minor updates that have transpired in the last few days in order for us to respond to the city transportation planner's comments. None of those updates are material to this application in terms of the actual front yard setback variance, and I can go through those and then focus on showing you exactly what we're requesting within that front yard on South Krause. So just generally, the project site is along South Krause, essentially bounded by Genesee Street to the south and Fayette to the north. This is directly across from Theory Syracuse, and you can see the image here on the title page is a photo rendering of Theory Syracuse, and directly across the street from that is the proposed mixed-use apartment project. Essentially, this is at the main intersection of the connective corridor with Genesee Street, building business class A zoning district. The existing site consists of 6 parcels. There's a small doctor's office on the corner. There's some office building in the center of South Krause Ave on that block, and then there's a small barber shop on the corner of Fayette. So ancillary applications would include a re-subdivision to combine these parcels into one for the benefit of the redevelopment, along with demolition of the existing site and buildings that are on site. Just along Genesee Street, kind of just point here for a second. South Krause is to the top of the page in the handout that I gave to you, and East Genesee Street is along the left-hand side. So you can see our building's been positioned on the corner there. There's an existing Ward Wellington Ward house, which is a historic house that will be preserved as part of this project. And we have presented to the Syracuse Landmark Preservation Board the plans to renovate that and bring it back to its old facade, including renovations to the porch, and then also making this available for a retail commercial use in the front of that space. And then in the back of that space, having it be part of our amenity program, where there's a pool and patio in the back, so there can be things like bathrooms and little seating areas and stuff within that. So that is part of the project as well. So the apartment project is a 6-story building, essentially equivalent to the surrounding buildings, including Theory Syracuse across the street. Currently it has 282 apartments on the 6th floor. There will be an underground parking garage that's accessed off of Fayette, which you can see the driveway shown on the plan. And the main entrance and exit lobby, I'm just gonna stay up here so I can point, and I apologize to the public because I'm kind of facing my back to you. The main entrance and exit is at the corner of South Krause and Genesee Street, which we'll talk about in a second. The other things that are provided in the plan as you enter the building would be some of our amenity spaces, things like a fitness program, there's a media room, conference room, there's also outdoor courtyard space within the center of the building between the 2 residential wings, and then further off to the east here, there's an outdoor pool and patio. As mentioned, the Ward Wellington Ward House will be renovated to incorporate that. We have a small off-street parking. What we have talked about with the Planning Commission is our original proposal had about 130 parking spaces, and that was part of their discussion, was that some of these other projects have been granted other waivers for parking to reduce that parking. And what we were tasked with was coming back essentially with additional parking. And what we've done there since the last meeting, have went out and acquired an additional piece of land, which is on South Krause. The project is just off the page here, so it's about 200, 300 feet away from the corner of South Krause and Fayette. So there's a vacant parcel there. There's actually 2 parcels. One is a old historic home, and the other is a vacant parcel at 201 Krause. We did present this to the Syracuse Landmark Preservation Board, and we've since removed some of that parking in order to give that house enough breathing room so that we can entertain a future use of like an office space or lawyer's office or a hair salon or something like that, and still provide parking for that use, and also enough room for landscaping and sidewalks in order to gain access to that building. So this is the plan that we'll be presenting for parking to the Planning Commission Monday night, but again, it's sort of outside this board's purview because that would be a waiver by the Planning Commission. So specific to what we are requesting today, and I can answer any other questions regarding the project at large, Well, I will go through the comments first. So some of the things that we've added in terms of the city transportation planner's comments are inclusion of pay stations that will be associated with the on-street parking that we're providing. There were some dimensional requirements of the loading space and some of the things that are happening out in the right-of-way. We've also revised the driveway configurations and added explicit notes for where the landscaping would be provided in order to restore some of the grass lawn and landscaping that's at the corner of Genesee Street and Krause. So again, none of those comments have changed materially the actual setback requests that we're having. But I did want to make sure that the board had the most up-to-date plan that we'll be presenting to the Planning Commission. This is the last page in your handout. I think this more clearly depicts exactly what we're talking about. The entire length of the building honors all of the building setbacks that are required of the district, which is 10 feet for a front yard setback. So you can see on the overall site plan, we have that 10 feet respected throughout the entire building. Genesee is actually even a little bit more, and that was to bring our building in line with the Ward Wellington Ward House. So all the setbacks are met with exception of this one area, which is what we're requesting for relief from that 10-yard front setback. And we'll essentially be building up to the property line. And the reason for this is that this is the main entrance to the lobby, and grading is a challenge with how we've established the first floor. This encroachment includes the ADA accessible handicap ramp to the building. It includes a pedestrian stair, and it also includes a covered overhang so that that entryway can be out of the weather. So I've shown you a blown up of that image with the stair, the ramp, there's a small waiting area, and essentially a projection of that canopy out into that front yard. The graphic over here is a photo simulation of what that looks like in terms of the canopy and the overhang that's there. So obviously a fairly minor request in terms of the overall scale of the project. In relation to the standards of proof, you know, we can compare this to the front yard setback that was granted for Theory, which is right across the street, which was almost the entire building was built up to the property line, which is kind of the direction that this district is heading in terms of the MX4 and the mixed use component and trying to re-engage the street front. Our project is a little different from Theory. They have a parking garage and end caps of commercial space along that frontage. Our project has the fitness area and some amenities, but some of South Krause are residential units. So we wanted to make sure we kind of pulled them away from the sidewalk, and that's why we've honored that 10-foot setback. But in terms of the standards of proof with an undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood, this would not change or create a detriment to nearby properties by granting this, because it is approaching the right-of-way and provides access to the building. Can't be achieved by any other method. Again, the grading of this is what's causing the need for that stair and that handicap ramp to get up to the first floor, and also just the ability to provide a covered entryway for keeping us out of the elements there. Whether or not it's substantial, again, this is a very small portion of the building. The remainder of the building stays within the setback that's required. So as far as the scope and what's substantial, this is very small compared to the scale of the building. Adverse environmental impacts. Again, this would not be an adverse environmental impact. It provides access to the building under cover and doesn't otherwise have any environmental conditions associated with it. And then whether it's self-created, you know, this obviously could always go both ways, but this is in some way you could assume that it is self-created because it's a desire of the project, but is obviously a necessary component of the project. So with that, I'll turn it back to the board for any questions or comments that you might have.
Who is the target market for this complex?
Okay, so our developer specifically tasked us with creating something that was not student specific. A lot of the other apartment projects are very purpose-built student housing projects. His vision for this is obviously that students probably will be some of the renters, but to create a unit mix that could essentially stand the test of time. A lot of these other projects, like Theory across the street, have things like 4, 5-bedroom units, renting for, I don't know what the rent is, but let's say $1,000 a month. It's hard to imagine somebody, in a 5-bedroom unit paying $5,000, right? Unless it's a student-specific per bed type of rent. Our unit mix is 90% 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom. There's only 12 three-bedrooms, and that's just because they're kind of the corners of the building that have a little bit of lost space. So his idea was to make this a market rate project, understanding that anybody has the ability to rent them, but a little bit different of a target in terms of the market rate product rather than a very specific purpose-built student product.
Is this cost, because I'm comparing it to something that I know about, is the word luxury put into this? You said you had a pool and an exercise area.
So we obviously are competing with other apartments that have amenities, right? One amenity that nobody has that he chose to include in this is the pool. It'll be an all-season pool, which is kind of counterintuitive with where we're at in Syracuse, but it'll have portions of heated concrete, and the idea would be a year-round pool. Luxury is not the word, it truly is market rate. It will be the rents that are equivalent to the rate of the market. It will have, obviously, finishes that you can imagine are state-of-the-art, right? There's a media room, podcast room. There's things that are going to attract, hopefully, tenants to this building, and attract them to our building rather than some other buildings. And it's a new build, so it'll have everything new, countertops and fridges and everything like that.
Is there a minimum age to rent?
No, there is no restriction for age. No.
Other questions?
The sidewalk from your porch to the curb, how wide will that be?
So we have 10 feet from, from the porch to the curb. It was originally 8 feet, and one change to this plan was to widen that to 10 feet based on the transportation planner's comment. So it's 10 feet from the property line to the curb line.
So from the building to the curb, how wide is that?
10 feet.
That's 10?
Oh, building to the curb, 20 feet.
20 feet?
Yeah, the 10-foot setback, and then a 10-foot to the curb. Yep.
So 8-foot sidewalk still from the steps, let's say, to the curb. Is that what you're saying?
So from the face of the building to the property line, our canopy is 10 feet, and then there's 10 feet of sidewalk to the curb.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Or am I losing you?
I think so. I'm just
Okay.
trying to figure out how much sidewalk is left
There's 10 feet.
after the.
Yes, there's 10
at the
feet.
porch. Okay.
Yep.
I know it's not a purview, but isn't that unfortunate that you have surface parking in addition to the underground parking? Wouldn't you rather have all underground?
We agree, right? We started with a reduced parking count with what the project was comfortable with. We essentially received only one comment at the first Planning Commission meeting, and that there was concern about, yes, we've granted waivers for substantially reduced parking in the past for projects, but as more of these projects come online, and you can look at Wellington Place where it was a surface parking lot and now it's an apartment, I think the Planning Commission is choosing to take a different look, right? Not necessarily comparing it to a different project, but what is the state of parking in the area today? We also heard from the East Genesee Regents Association, which is the area local businesses. They have a committee that represent all of the businesses and institutions along Genesee Street, and they mimic the same comment. We're concerned that if there is not enough parking provided specific to the project, that will encumber on-street parking and parking lots that are otherwise available for our businesses. So although our project was comfortable with what we originally proposed with reduced parking, we were essentially tasked with coming back with additional parking. What we've provided, we believe, meets the Planning Commission's intent with regard to that. And it's a necessity of the project essentially at this point. Both the on-site parking, inclusion of leased spaces and acquired parking off-site, and then constructing public parking as a concession to obviously the public to use for not only pick up and drop off for our residents, but also people that would be using the local businesses down there.
So you're saying it's there because you needed to provide more parking
Correct.
spaces. Would it have been possible to increase the footing of the building to put that underground?
We looked at it 3 different ways. So we did increase the parking that is in the parking garage. There was previously like storage lockers that we took out so we could provide more underground parking. We did look at expanding the footprint of the parking garage beyond the footprint of the building over into this space. We have other needs for the project other than parking. There's mechanical equipment in terms of a generator, there's HVAC chillers, there's transformers, and there's also stormwater management. So it was not viable to extend the parking garage any further because there would then be no footprint to place things like the utilities and stormwater management. What we did do is add surface parking there. Surface parking is fine because we can include the utilities around it and not have it encumbered by a subterranean parking garage. But we did look at that, and it just wasn't viable in terms of the layout of the project.
Will there be any commercial space at street level on the building?
Yes, we started as a residential apartment project, and that has since changed as well. There was a strong feeling from both the East Genesee Region Association and the Planning Commission, along with comments from staff, that this is really envisioned as the MX4 district in the future. So we're not bound by those regulations yet, but we can imagine that this building will probably surpass the time that that's approved, right? So we did. We transitioned the Ward Wellington Ward House and focused on providing those businesses sort of on the Genesee facing corridor. So there's the Ward Wellington Ward House that'll be commercial, and we also changed what was our previous fitness area of 1,500 square feet into a commercial retail use that would have a patio and sidewalk facing Genesee Street as well.
Other questions?
Just as we do the balancing test on ultimate solutions for the 10 feet, there was, just looking at the floor plan, no way to accommodate that inside the existing footprint of the building?
No. The grade change is part of it. Obviously the finished floor of the building wants to be consistent. So creating that undulation in the floor plate, there's a parking garage below us. So suppressing it in order to get at grade with what exists would impact the structure of, obviously there's a parking garage below it. So the overhead space there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody here who wishes to speak in favor of the application? Is there anybody here who wishes to speak against the application? Hearing none, I will close that case. Our new business requires 2 votes. So I'm going to propose that we go back and vote on the 3 that we discussed, and then go to that, and that'll be a natural progression. So V-0821 M2 use variant 960 Salt Springs Road, that's the Elm Crest. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to pass. Approve, excuse me.
I'll second.
You need to go through the
Standards.
standards, which are,
On page 3, right? I think they're on page 3, that's right. Yeah, page 3, correct? Yes. All right, the applicant cannot realize a reasonable return, provided the lack of return is substantial as demonstrated by competent financial evidence. And I really don't see this question being really applicable in as much as that Elmcrest is, it's a building on campus, and they're making the renovations based on needs for community-related services. The second question, the alleged hardship relating to the property in question is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. It's unique in as much as it's changing to meet services that they are providing. And as far as applying to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood, it's right on campus. So it doesn't really affect the neighborhood in any way. Question 3, the requested use variance, if granted, will not alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood. And no, it will not, because most of the renovations are done within the structure of the building, and it is located on campus. And apart from anyone really knowing what's happening with the internal renovations, The outside structure pretty much is going to stay the same, and the character of the neighborhood's not going to be affected. And question 4, the alleged hardship has not been self-created. I don't necessarily look at this as a self-created hardship, in as much as, again, that a renovation is going to be done to provide services.
Thank you. Who's second? Yes. Anything else?
No, I think just noting the reasonable rate of return, the funding source is no longer viable, so it is for the existing use.
Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the variance say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. No votes, no abstentions. B2222, use variance with permitted 360-3601-2 and 362-366 Richmond Avenue to establish a 4-family dwelling. Is there a motion?
I'd like to correct my previous statement saying I had made a typo. That is accurate. It is 32%, the coverage.
But not plus or minus, it's 32.
Yep,
Okay.
Okay. So it's
just a little, tiny bit over.
Just a little bit over. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
we're just making note
Thank
of
you.
that.
And that helps. Is there a motion?
Make a motion, we approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. The applicant cannot realize a reasonable return provided that the return is, as Terry has stated, to turn that into a useful house is very expensive, and it's been on the market for like 15 years and no one is interested in it. The alleged hardship related to the property is unique. The tiny home it's an abandoned 5-family house, which they're going to make a 4-family, which is acceptable. There'll be no changes to the neighborhood and negative changes to the neighborhood by renovating this house. It will be an improvement, and it's not self-created.
It's a difficult part of town. If this is not going to be the most attractive building in the city, but it is probably going to be much better than the vacant lot that might have been there if the city had found the money to demolish it.
Getting people who need homes.
Yes, that too.
In place, which is great. Okay, all those in favor of approving the variance say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Okay, no, none. That's unanimous too. On a roll. V2219 area variance to waive the required front yard for, I'll read it, 1,000 to 19 and 127 to 29 East Genesee, 313 to 323, 309, 301 to 307 South Krause, and 1014 to 1016 East Fayette Street. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I'm taking Nora.
Okay, you can take Nora. That's fine.
Not for any special reason, I heard her first.
Will there be a change to the neighborhood character? The specific thing that we're being asked to approve here will not make a significant change to the character of the neighborhood. There'll still be plenty of room to get around on the sidewalk, and it provides, it's ADA accessible. So I think, and the overall, we should consider the overall project, which I think will be an improvement to the overall character of the neighborhood. Are there alternate solutions available so that a variance is not needed? We've explored those with the applicant. Looks like this is the best solution given the setting of the building. What is the magnitude of the variance being requested? It is not major, and it still allows for pedestrian traffic around, so not major. Will there be an adverse effect to the surrounding neighborhood if this variance is approved? I think there'll be very little effect, if any, on the neighborhood. is this self-created difficulty? It sounds to be required within the design of the overall project, so I would say not.
Nothing to add.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the variance, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. The next thing we do is the 2 votes on 910 Madison Street. Brody, do you want to lead us through this? Is that the best way to do it?
May I approach and hand out a few things?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you may also have copies from last time. I brought So the document that I handed out to you to start with is the State Environmental Quality Review Act finding statement. And you've seen this document once before at the October meeting. I'm going to read to you just a couple paragraphs. It's a 16-page document. I'm just going to read you a couple paragraphs just to refamiliarize yourself with the procedural posture, where you're at in the process here. So you completed your review of the EAF on June 3rd, 2021, and determined that the project may have the potential for one significant adverse environmental impact, requiring the applicant to prepare an environmental impact statement. You issued that positive declaration at your meeting on July 15th, 2021. The applicant then submitted a draft scoping document in August 2021, which was received by the BZA and acknowledged at the August 2021 meeting. Public comments were accepted through the end of September, and a notice of draft scope was published in August of 2021, and again in September on the DEC website. There was a final scope that was approved by this board in October of 2021. The applicant then drafted a draft environmental impact statement, which was submitted in April of 2022. The BZA accepted public comments through the end of June 2022. A final EIS was submitted in August of 2022 and accepted as complete by this board in September. You discussed this project again at your October meeting, where you had a draft of this proposed finding statement. So, long story short, the project, you issued a positive declaration for the project. You required the applicant to prepare an environmental impact statement. They did. You accepted it as complete. And so now your next task, or your final task as part of the seeker process, is to issue either a positive or a negative finding statement about the project based on the EIS. So going to the last page here, the conclusion, this document was prepared based on my conversations I had with you individually, and based on some comments. There were some adjustments made from the last meeting just in terms of the factual background, where I made some factual adjustments from the last version of it. But the important thing for this board to consider before you vote is the proposed conclusion. The conclusion states that the BZA has considered the relevant environmental impacts, facts, and conclusions disclosed in the FEIS, has weighed and balanced relevant environmental impacts with social, economic, and other considerations, and having done so now issues a positive finding statement. The BZA acknowledges that the project will have a small impact on surrounding historic structures in the form of shadows cast by the building and visual impacts on views from Sherbrooke and to a lesser extent other locations. However, the design of the project sufficiently mitigates and minimizes adverse environmental impacts to the maximum extent practical. The scale of the project has been reduced to address many of the concerns voiced during the application process. The current version of the project is the best reasonable alternative available. These findings expressly incorporate the mitigation measures suggested in the SHPO letter of resolution dated March 4, 2022. The mitigation measures suggested by SHPO will minimize adverse effects on historic resources located on the property, including the temple sanctuary. The small adverse impacts on historic resources created by the project are outweighed by the benefits of the project. The project will preserve the temple sanctuary and provide needed additional student housing to the area. The project is largely in keeping with present land uses in the neighborhood, namely student housing and businesses uses serving students and university staff. After evaluating the information provided in the FEIS, the project is not out of scale with other structures in the area. So if the board agrees with this finding statement, the next step in your process would be to up or down this draft. Say you agree with it, would be a positive vote. If there, after further reflection, you disagree with it, you want me to write it differently, you could tell me to do that too. Yeah.
So, just simply, is there a motion to approve this finding statement? You'll make the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion?
Yep, you should have
do
discussion
we
if,
need,
if anyone desires to. Yeah.
No, I just, as the finding statement outlines, the board took a long and hard look at the proposed materials, and I think came up with the best sort of available mitigation and documentation of that as we could. It has been a long road, and here we are. Oh, I want to thank Brody for all of his hard work.
Who seconded?
I did.
Anything else?
And nothing really further to add outside of, I even walked the site again and considered all of what was stated in the hearings and in the documentation. And I think it's a positive move.
Okay. Call the question. All those in favor of approving the finding statement, say aye.
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 No? None? That's unanimous. The next, anything else you want to say, Brody, or should I go right to the?
The next step is your resolution.
Right.
The other one that we,
Right, we vote on the area, variance. Okay.
We finally got to the board's main business. Again, this has been shared with you by email ahead of time, but I printed out copies in case you don't have it with you there. So the second document that I've provided to you is something you'll be more familiar with than, all that seeker detail. You've completed your obligations under seeker. The next step is to up or down the variances. You could vote for them, up or down individually or together. Based on my conversations with the board, I've done a draft resolution that deals with all the variances at once. If you want to refamiliarize yourself with what the individual variances that are being asked for, the last page of this document is a table that shows the code requirement and what the applicant is asking for. The variances are in 4 categories: coverage, density, side yard, and rear yard are the four variances that are being requested. This resolution, based on my instructions, I've drafted this approving the 4 variances based on the feedback that I've received from the board, and I provided on each of the 5 factors that you weigh when deciding whether or not to issue an area variance. I included information from the process based on that feedback and that what was provided by the public and the applicant relevant to each of those 5 factors. I'll stop there. and answer any questions that come up either during your deliberations or beforehand. But now that you've completed your obligations under seeker, you're in a position where you can actually make a decision on the variances.
So it's V 21-07, area variance to a required yards, maximum structural coverage, and required density 910 Madison Street. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second from you. Okay.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts. Will there be a change to the neighborhood character? The character of this neighborhood has undergone significant change over the years, and this project will be consistent with the direction that change has taken. At the time Temple Concord was built, University Avenue was lined with large, expensive homes. Nearly all of these have now been demolished. More recent development includes buildings like the University Avenue Garage, the Whitman School of Management, and large-scale purpose-built student housing complexes blocks away. Temple Concord is currently abandoned, deteriorating, and has experienced incidents of trespass. The buildings are in poor shape with no plans for renovation. The original 1911 Temple Concord building is one of the few completed synagogues designed by Arnold W. Brunner that still retains its original form and function. Brunner was the leading Jewish architect in America at the time of the Temple Concord's construction, and he was a national leader in the architectural profession. The building is historically and architecturally important, and its preservation is one of the most important outcomes of this proposal. One of the comments we heard during the hearing was that this is a valuable site. If we turn down this proposal, others will surely follow. It is true that due to its location, this would be a valuable building site, but will any future offers include an extensive preservation and restoration of the original sanctuary building? We only need to look at the long-abandoned Mitzvah Towers downtown and the vacant South Presbyterian Church building on South Salina to see what could become of this historic resource without significant investment. Are there alternative solutions available so that a variance is not needed? Abandoned religious buildings are a significant problem across the country, and they don't often lend themselves to easy adaptive reuse. The dimensions and density of this project, although large, appear to be necessary to meet reasonable financial objectives, and they're not out of character compared to other projects that have already been built in the area. What's the magnitude of the variance being requested? The magnitude of the requested variance is not small, but it is in keeping with similar projects in the area, like the Whitman School of Management and the large student housing complexes recently completed in the area. The applicants have also reduced the magnitude of the variances requested from what they had been originally. The first variance request would have demolished a portion of the rear of the sanctuary building. The current design retains the entire sanctuary, and the applicant has pledged to invest $1 million to stabilize and restore the building. This work will also be done under the guidance of the New York State Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. The number of stories of the project was reduced from 8 to 7, and the overall height of the project was reduced to mitigate impacts to neighboring properties. As a result, the size of the overall project was reduced from 219 units with 657 bedrooms to 210 units with 599 bedrooms. Portions of the original building were amended to allow greater visibility of the temple sanctuary building from the street. Exterior building materials were also revised to better match the temple sanctuary exterior. Will there be an adverse effect on the surrounding neighborhood if the variance is approved? The project will cast shadows on some nearby buildings depending on the season and the time of day, but these impacts are consistent with similar multi-story projects within the immediate area. The project will have benefits beyond the restoration of the original sanctuary building. There will be new sidewalks and landscaping along Madison Street and University Avenue. The project will rehabilitate aging sections of the existing sewer pipe within the adjacent roadways. And of course, the formerly tax-exempt religious property will now be taxable, contributing substantially to the city's tax base. Is this a self-created difficulty? No, it's not. A religious complex of this type is never easy to adapt to a new use. The applicant's proposal is a reasonable adaptation for this large historic site.
Thank you, Mike. Nora, got anything to add?
I couldn't possibly.
Okay. I guess we'll vote, right?
You may.
Call the question. All those in favor of approving the variance, say aye.
Aye.
All, no? It is adopted. We have an authorization for January 5th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve this authorization?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, happy holidays, everybody. We're adjourned.
Excuse me?
You might want to talk to these people here. These people at the desk.
Hi, how are you?
So,